Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the EFL Digest. On today's show, we're going to be talking about all things shrimps, take a little look at Bolton Wanderers' absolute smashing of Plymouth Argyle, and also take a little look at Stockport's rise to a top 3 in League 2. All that and more today on the EFL Digest. So off we go with the first set of fixtures, and this was from Friday, the 7th of April. So in the Championship, Millwall drew 0-0 with Luton at home. Rotherham at home won 3-1 against West Brom. Norwich had an away victory at Blackburn, 2-0. Cardiff City won away at Blackpool, 3-1. Preston won away at QPR, 2-0. Reading drew at home to Blackburn, 1-1. Sheffield won at home to Wigan, 1-0. Stoke lost at home to Bristol City, who they won 2-1. Swansea drew at home against Coventry, 0-0. Watford lost at home to Huddersfield in a 3-2 victory to Neil Warnock's Huddersfield. Sunderland, in a massive shocker, drew 4-4 at home against Hull. And Middlesbrough lost at home to Burnley 2-1. Over in League 1 on that Friday, Accrington won at home against Port Vale 3-0. Bristol City beat Charlton 1-0. Burton won 2-1 against Barnsley. Cambridge also won 2-1 against Fleetwood. Bolton beat Exeter in a 1-0 victory. Derby beat Forest Green by 2-0. Ipswich thrashed Wycombe in a 4-0 victory. Lincoln beat Cheltenham 2-0. MK Dons drew at home to Portsmouth 1-1. Morecambe, our Shrimps, got smashed 3-1 by Plymouth. We'll look a bit more at that later. Oxford drew at home to Sheffield Wednesday 1-1 in a shock result. And Peterborough smashed Shrewsbury 3-0. Over to League 2 on that Friday. Carlisle won 2-0 against Tranmere. Crawley drew to Bradford 0-0. Crewe beat Barrow 3-0. Gillingham won against Doncaster 1-0. Hartlepool beat Grimsby 4-1. Harrogate drew at home to Wimbledon 2-2. Newport thrashed Northampton at home 3-0. Rochdale, with a shock win against Walsall, won 4-2. Leyton Orient beat Salford 2-0. Stevenage drew at home to Colchester 1-1. Sutton United were beaten a 1-0 victory to Stockport County. And Swindon were smashed at home by Mansfield in a 4-2 victory to Mansfield. And now on to yesterday's fixtures. Huddersfield drew against Blackburn in an absolute shocker for Neil Warnock's Huddersfield. They were 2-0 up and succumbed to a 2-2 draw, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Birmingham drew at home to Stoke 0-0. Sunderland beat Cardiff 1-0. Coventry drew 2-2 to Watford. Hull beat Millwall 1-0. Blackpool were thrashed by Luton 3-1. Norwich drew to Rotherham 0-0. Preston beat Reading 2-1. West Brom drew to QPR 2-2. Wigan were beaten at home 2-0 by Swansea. Bristol City drew 2-2 at home against Middlesbrough. And Burnley thrashed Sheffield Wednesday in a 2-0 victory. Over to League 1, Barnsley beat Shrewsbury 2-1. Bolton drew 1-1 against Cambridge. Charlton beat Burton 3-2. Cheltenham drew to Ipswich 1-1. MK Dons drew away to Derby. Bristol Rovers won 2-1 at Highbury against Fleetwood. Peterborough won 3-1 at home against Exeter. Lincoln, in a shock victory, beat Plymouth, top of the league Plymouth, 2-0. Port Vale drew to Oxford United 0-0. Morecambe went away and drew to Portsmouth 0-0. Sheffield Wednesday beat Accrington Stanley 3-0. And Wycombe beat Forest Green 2-0. Finally over to League 2, where Wimbledon were beaten 3-2 by Salford in a game that nearly gave Gary Neville a heart attack. Barrow won 4-0 at home to Crawley. Bradford won at home 3-1 against Sutton United. Colchester, in another home victory, won 4-0 against Crewe. Grimsby went away to Doncaster and won 2-1. Hartlepool drew at home to Stevenage 1-1. Leyton Orient drew 2-2 against Harrogate Town. Mansfield at home drew 1-1 against Rochdale. Northampton Town won 2-1 at home against Gillingham. Stockport County were at home to Newport and smashed them 4-0. Tranmere at home to Swindon and won 1-0. And finally, Walsall drew at home 0-0 to Carlisle. And now in the spirit of our EFL Digest, we are going to take in a couple of games a little bit more closely. And we're going to start off with last Friday's game in the Championship. We're going to start off with Rotherham versus West Brom. As we already discussed, the game finished 3-1 to Rotherham United, leaving them 18th in the table, whereas West Bromwich Albion currently sit at 11th on 57 points with a 6-goal difference and 40 played, whereas Rotherham had 40 played, they're on -8 goal difference and they're on 45 points. So Rotherham really needing a few more points to try and cement their place in the Championship. So really, that was quite a good result for them, to be honest. Looking at the table currently, West Bromwich Albion sit firmly mid-table, pushing towards those playoff places, whereas Rotherham sit only 4 places above relegation, where Reading, Blackpool and Wigan currently reside. So Rotherham United looking to pull away, looking to pull out of that relegation fight, and their 0-0 draw against Norwich yesterday, to be honest, hasn't really given them that. So Rotherham will be looking to push away from that relegation zone further. But considering Reading has recently been deducted 6 points and Wigan got deducted those 3 points for the wage embargo, it looks like those two teams may be going down this season. The goal scorers for Rotherham United yesterday, it was Hugh Gill in the 47th and 50th minute and Fosu in the 76th, whereas Swift scored for West Bromwich Albion in a penalty in the 32nd minute. It was at the ACL New York Stadium in Rotherham. Tim Robinson took charge of the game and the attendance was 11,098, with Connor Coventry getting a yellow card for Rotherham United, along with Oliver Rathbone. And for West Bromwich Albion, Connor Townsend, Kyle Bartley, Carlin Grant and Nathaniel Chalobah also getting yellow cards with no red cards in the game. The second match we will look at today is Sunderland's 4-4 draw against Hull City. It was at the Stadium of Light. The match was taken charge of by Keith Stroud and was 40,677 in attendance. Hull City opened the scoreline in the 11th minute with Tufan scoring. That was then countered by Geldhart in the 21st minute and followed up by Ahmad in the 22nd minute, with Syed Mensah firing back in the 25th minute. And then it took until the 66th minute for Slater to put another one in for Hull City. Then in the 73rd minute, Ahmad scored the penalty for Sunderland. And then Clark also doubled that down in the 81st minute. But a surprise pen in the 90th minute gave Hull City the draw, with Tufan putting that ball straight in the back of Sunderland's net. Currently, Sunderland AFC are looking to bounce straight back into the Premier League and fighting for those playoff places, where they sit in 10th with 41 played, 8 goal difference and 58 points in the league, whereas Hull City ultimately sit at 16th, firm mid-table, with 41 played, a -9 goal difference and 52 points. So it's very, very tight, very tight in the mid-table at the minute, with 13th down to 16th being a 1-point gap, with Bristol City sat on 53, Swansea sat on 53, Stoke on 52, and Hull sat on 52 as well. At the minute, it looks all to play for in the Championship. It's quite a good league this season, with Burnley already being promoted ahead after yesterday's win against Sheffield United. It leaves them sat at 90 points. There were 2 yellow cards in that game against Sunderland and Hull, and one came for Saïd Mensah in the 34th minute, and the second one coming for Callum Elder in the 82nd minute. Over to League One now. Accrington Stanley won 3-0 to Port Vale at home. We're going to take a little closer look to that one, with Stevens scoring an own goal for Port Vale in the 31st minute, where Rodgers scored for Accrington Stanley in the 40th, and there was a penalty and Presley scored in the 68th minute. It was at the Wham Stadium in Accrington. Andy Woolmer took control of the game, and the attendance was 3,444, where there were 2 yellow cards in the game and 1 red card. Funzo Ojo was given a red card in the 90 plus 3rd minute, with Gavin Massey being booked for Port Vale in the 90 plus 4 minute, and Ayedeji was also yellow carded for Accrington Stanley in the 90 plus 4 minute as well. Looking at League One, Accrington Stanley firmly sit at the top of a relegation zone on 38 points, whereas their opponents, Port Vale, just sitting above that relegation zone in the 17th place on 46 points, below them being Burton, Milton Keynes Dons and Oxford United. Port Vale being on 46, Burton being on 45 points, Milton Keynes Dons being on 42 points, and Oxford being on 40 points. Them just being 2 points ahead of Accrington Stanley and being in that relegation zone. The other relegation opponents, Cambridge United, Morecambe, and Forest Green United. Forest Green at the bottom of the table on 26 points. It's not really looking great for Forest Green at the minute. I'm fairly sure that they are relegated now. They are most likely going to be one of the relegation contenders. Whereas Morecambe sitting at 35 with a home game coming up against Lincoln and a couple more away games with Charlton and Exeter on the horizon. The Shrimps' away form has been quite poor, so not really looking forward to those ones. Cambridge United on 37 points and Accrington Stanley sitting 1 point above them on 38. So all that really needs to happen is for them to just come and get some form, really, for Cambridge and Accrington Stanley and Morecambe, really. They need to just get a little bit of form, go on a little run of form. 3 points are needed all across the board for these 3 teams. All they need to do is just go all out for these next few games, and all they need to do is just win. Speaking of the Shrimps, we'll look at the first of 2 fixtures we'll look at from Morecambe today. Morecambe were winning at first in the Plymouth Argyle game at home at the Mazuma Stadium, with Mark Edwards taking charge and 4,904 being the attendance. Jensen Weir put the Shrimps firmly ahead in the 3rd minute, whereas a lapse of judgment from Derek Adams potentially, and a bit of a lack of oomph from the players in the second half meant that Plymouth Argyle capitalised on that and put 3 goals past the Shrimps in the second half to make sure that Morecambe could not come back, with Mayer scoring in the 63rd minute for Plymouth Argyle, Wayne in the 86th minute, and with Matette scoring in the 90th minute to seal the Shrimps' fate of losing that game. The Shrimps were a bit lax in that game, with the yellow card with Ferran Rawson in the 30th minute, Joe Edwards for Plymouth in the 59th minute, Josh Osterfield in the 74th minute for Morecambe, and finally Matette in the 90 plus 4 minute. Going back to talking about that relegation fight, all the Shrimps really need to do is go on a run of form. There is Lincoln at home this coming Saturday, followed by an away trip to Charlton the following week. So really what the Shrimps need to do is we need to put this to bed, really. We need to pull 6 points out in these next 2 games. We need to go all out. But the away form being as sort of dire as it is, having one away win all season, doesn't really fill us with hope going against Charlton Athletic, who actually currently sit at 10th in the table on 55 points. But considering we went away to Portsmouth, who currently sit at 9th, just above them, and drew 0-0 yesterday, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, sort of could fill us a little bit with hope, because all we needed to do yesterday was score, and as we'll discuss later, it just didn't really seem to come. Moving on to League 2 discussion, and we'll talk about Carlisle United's 2-0 victory over Tranmere Rovers, with Dennis scoring both goals for Carlisle United in the 3rd minute and the 39th minute. The game was at home, Carlisle's home, Brunton Park, with Thomas Kirk taking charge and 13,410 in attendance for Carlisle. 3 yellow cards yesterday. 2 for Carlisle United, those being Alfie McCalmont and Joe Garner, and 1 for Tranmere being Kane Hemmings. Currently, Carlisle United sit in 4th place. They are currently in the playoffs. They're firmly at the top of the playoffs, being on 70 points, just behind Stockport County, who are also on 70 points. It is the goal difference that has put Stockport up in that automatic zone, being that of a positive 24, whereas Carlisle sit on 23. So 1 goal sits between 3rd and 4th place. But if Carlisle were to go into the playoffs, I think they probably would be looking at quite an interesting time if the playoff situation stays as it is now, because currently it's Carlisle, Stevenage, Bradford and Salford all sat in that playoff spot. It would be quite an interesting playoffs to see those 4 teams going ahead. Bradford City turning it around from losing Derek Adams later last season and struggling a little bit from the sacking of Derek Adams and the mutual consent over leaving of Derek Adams. They seem to have brought it a bit back around this season, where they do sit in the playoff zone, which is quite good for Bradford. Also, Salford City, the class of 92 team, also sitting at the bottom of the playoffs on 66 points, with Mansfield closing in on them with 65 points. They are 1 point behind. Barrow also closing in. They are on 61 with a -1 goal difference and 41 played. So they do have a game in hand over Mansfield Town, which could give Mansfield the advantage in that race. Currently looking at the relegation zone in League 2, sit Crawley and Rochdale, with Rochdale on 33 points with a -23 goal difference, and Crawley Town sitting on 38 points with a -25 goal difference. Rochdale in recent times, after sacking Jim Bentley, have really been pulling it back. We're going to take a little look at Rochdale a bit closer in these next 2 segments. We're going to talk a little bit about Rochdale in the Monday games as well. So we're going to talk about Rochdale next. And with that, Rochdale won at home 4-2 against Walsall, with Henderson, Lloyd McKendrick, Taylor and Bailey scoring all the goals for Rochdale, with Henderson scoring in his 42nd, McGoldrick in the 44th, Taylor in the 56th, and Bailey in the 65th. Matt scoring for Walsall in the 23rd minute, and Knowles in the 51st minute. It was at the Crown Oil Arena, with Andy Haynes taking charge of that game and 3,090 in attendance. There were 2 yellow cards in the game, both for Walsall. 1 in the 65th minute to Owen Evans, and 1 in the 69th minute to Jack Maddox. Walsall currently sit at 13th in the table, whereas Rochdale sit at 24th. So really, that was a really good game for Rochdale. It's quite surprising that they've started to turn this around, really, because I don't know if it's too late for Rochdale. Looking at the table, where they sat on 33 points, if they went on a little run, if they could keep the points pouring in, if they could keep getting 3 points, they could do it, because Hartlepool aren't that close away from a relegation zone themselves, as they sit at 39 points, just above Crawley Town on 22nd. And moving on to the Monday fixtures now. Back in the Championship, Huddersfield drew in a shock result to Blackburn Rovers. Pearson scoring for Huddersfield in the 16th minute, with Rodoni scoring in the 22nd, whereas Blackburn came back in the 47th with Rakin Costello scoring in the 47th minute and Hedges scoring in the 90th minute to cement the draw and sharing the points between the 2 teams. It was at the John Smith Stadium. Stephen Martin was taking charge of the game, and there was 20,887 in attendance. The yellow cards all came for Blackburn Rovers in the game yesterday. In the 24th minute with Hayden Carter, 45th for Rankin Costello, and 75th for Sammy Sismondix. Blackburn Rovers currently sit in the playoffs in 6th position. They're at the bottom of the playoffs at the minute, whereas Huddersfield are pulling away from relegation zone. Neil Warnock pulling away after he's been given the job for Huddersfield. They were firm favourites for relegation, But with Reading, Blackpool and Wigan being in dire situations themselves, they've managed to pull away. So really the Neil Warnock signing was quite a good one, as it's started to give them a little bit of a run of form. Going 2-0 up against Blackburn, who are promotion favourites this season, who are doing really well, is not really something to be underestimated. Neil Warnock's done quite a good job here. He's come in, he's seen that we're in a relegation fight. They were in a relegation fight. He saw what needed to be changed, and he did it. And now you're seeing Huddersfield pull away from that relegation zone. But they're not out of the woods yet, because they do only sit 2 places away from a relegation zone, with there only being 2 points between them and 22nd place Reading, which could drag them back down if the run of form ends for Huddersfield United. And on to another relegation contender, this being Blackpool, who lost away to Luton Town in a 3-1 victory to Luton, with Mapanzu scoring in the 45th and 76th minute, with Morris in the 72nd minute, and Lyons scoring the only goal for Blackpool in the 29th minute. It was at Neilworth Road. Andy Davis took charge of the game, and the attendance was 9,772. There are 3 yellow cards in the game, 2 for Luton, that being Thornley and for Fiorini, and Carlton Morris in the 81st minute. Luton currently sit 3rd in the league on 71 points, played 41 with a 15 goal difference, and Blackpool sit in the 23rd position in the relegation zone on 35 points with a minus 24 goal difference, and again played 41. It seems to be looking as if Blackpool are majorly struggling here. Blackpool really are struggling in the Championship this season, but with matches against Wigan Athletic coming very soon, could they get some more points on the board? Their next few games, some of them are quite tough. They've got Wigan at home at Bloomsfield Road, with Wigan sitting at the bottom of the table, and really the problems stemming from on the pitch as well as off the pitch. So they are strugglers. They will struggle at Bloomsfield Road. Then they have West Brom at home, and Birmingham away, Millwall at home, and then Norwich away. So there are some tough games coming up for Blackpool, with West Brom, Birmingham, Millwall and Norwich all being tough games. Now moving on to Burnley Football Club, with Gudmundsson scoring 2 goals yesterday in the 60th and 70th minute, 10 minutes between the 2 goals on Vincent Kompany's birthday. At Turf Moor, with Michael Salisbury taking charge of the game with 21,506 in attendance. Burnley, to be honest, Burnley in the first half, I was watching this game last night on the way home from Portsmouth. Burnley in the first half really seemed to have switched off in the first half. They just didn't really play that well. But whatever happened in the changing rooms in the halftime break really changed it, because we came out fighting in the second half. And really, the second half was a lot more exciting than the first. But on to the big controversial topic. Fodringham, it's a red card. He tackled Teller in the box. Only for Fodringham to be shown a red card and sent off the pitch, which led to Sheffield United having to sacrifice Jack Robinson for Adam Davies to come on and play in net for them. Burnley are currently sitting in first place on 90 points, where they are mathematically guaranteed Premier League football next season, whereas Sheffield United currently sit in second place on 76 points, where currently they are massively trailing behind Burnley on 90 points, but they do still sit in automatics above the playoff zone, where Luton Town sit at the top on 71 points. So there's a 5-point difference and a 5-point gap between the automatics and the playoffs. On to a first of our look at the League One games from yesterday. Plymouth Argyle in a shock loss at home to Lincoln City, with Shodipo scoring in the 28th minute and House scoring in the 47th. It was at Home Park. Tom Neal took charge of the game, and there was 16,298 in attendance. The yellow cards coming from Plymouth's James Wilson, Lincoln's O'Connor, Lincoln's Virtue, and Lincoln's Erehon. The loss yesterday for Plymouth means they have currently slipped into a second place in League One, with Sheffield Wednesday taking back their title, with there being 1 point between the two teams and them being on a 26 goal difference, whereas Sheffield Wednesday have shot ahead on a 39 goal difference with a game in hand against Argyle. The current situation in the playoffs is looking like this. Third place is Ipswich Town on 82 points, Barnsley fourth in 78 points, Peterborough on 70, and Bolton Wanderers trailing on 68. With there being a big gap between that third and sixth spot, Bolton trailing massively behind the likes of Ipswich and Barnsley there, with 10 points being between them and Barnsley, whereas Derby are closing in on Bolton Wanderers, with them being on 68 points, the same as Bolton, but trailing 2 goals behind them. But Bolton Wanderers do have a game less played than Derby County, meaning Bolton Wanderers could extend that lead even further. Then finally for League One, we are on to Morecambe and Portsmouth, with it being played at Fratton Park yesterday at 3 o'clock, with Oliver Yates taking charge of a game and 17,739 in attendance. With onto the bookings, 2 familiar faces for Morecambe on the booking sheet yesterday, with Osterfield and Farron Rawson both being booked, with Portsmouth, Owen Dale and Colby Bishop also being booked. The Shrimps are currently sat at 23rd on 35 points, and the lack of away form really has meant that the Shrimps are struggling this year. It's not been great, to be honest. The away form has been dire, to say the least, and really it just shows because we just can't seem to score. We went away yesterday to Portsmouth, gave them a really good game, to be honest. We looked like the better team in the first half, but we just can't score away, whether that being Cole Stockton and his newfound laziness, or that being inexperience from the likes of Jake Taylor and others. Another shock was the blatant time wasting from Derek Adams and Connor Ripley. It's been a bit weird. The fact that we need 3 points and the goalkeeper can take as much time as he likes standing in the goal, waiting to take goal kicks, or lying down like Jordan Pickford on the floor, just extending the time needlessly where we're needing points on the board and not getting the ball back into action so we can actually go and try and score, being unfortunately inexcusable. For me, Connor Ripley has been my player of the season. Yesterday, I'm sorry, Connor, but I feel like you let yourself down a little bit by just needlessly time wasting. Unfortunately, that's what we did. Moving on from the Shrimps now, on to League 2 action. Bradford City won at home 3-1 against Sutton United, with Banks, Chapman and Cook scoring for Bradford and Bogle scoring for Sutton. The yellow cards being as follows. Bradford had 2 yellow cards on their books, with Liam Rydell and Scott Banks both being booked for Bradford, with Lee Angle being booked for Sutton United. The game was played at the University of Bradford Stadium. Ross Joyce took charge of a game with 17,769 in attendance. Bradford City currently sit 6th in the league with 68 points, whereas Sutton United sit at 10th, pushing for that playoff place with 57 points and a -3 goal difference. The teams around Sutton United are Barrow and Mansfield. Barrow being 61 points and Mansfield being on 65. So Sutton United are trailing ever so slightly towards the 8th and 9th spot and pushing for playoffs. But with these games to go, who knows what's going to happen? Barrow, Mansfield may drop points. They may pick up a lot of points. Who knows? It's all to play for that promotion spot in League 2 between Mansfield, Barrow and Sutton, with even Tranmere Rovers potentially coming into that fight themselves. And then finally on to Stockport County, who yesterday put themselves into the automatics with a 4-0 victory against Newport County, with Wootton scoring 2, one in the 9th minute, one in the 45th, Stretton scoring in the 65th minute and Noyle scoring in the 89th. The match was played at Edgeley Park, with Carl Brook taking charge and 9,179 in attendance, with Cameron Norman being booked for Newport County being the only card in the game. Stockport are currently sat in the third place in the automatic zone on 70 points, with Carlisle being 1 goal behind them on 23 goals. Taking a look at Newport County, they are on the other side of League 2. They are currently sat in 18th place, just below AFC Wimbledon on -6 goal difference and 47 points, whereas Gillingham sit beneath them on -15 goal difference and 47 points, meaning that Newport County are only a couple of wins away from cementing mid-table status and making sure that they don't slip even further down the table. And finally, we're going to take a little look at 2 recent news stories in the EFL, that being the final of the Papa John's Trophy and Mick McCarthy's sacking at Blackpool. But first, we're going to take a look at Bolton Wanderers' thrashing of Plymouth Argyle, with Dempsey, Charles, Kachunga and Jones all scoring past Plymouth Argyle. It was on the 2nd of April at Wembley Stadium. This took place. Over 70,000 fans in attendance, it being one of the most watched games in the whole of Europe that weekend, with the yellow cards being all for Plymouth Argyle, with Danny Mayer, Dan Scarr and Sam Cosgrove all receiving yellow cards. The match was very, very, very one-sided, with Bolton playing with the wideness of the pitch to their advantage, whereas Plymouth Argyle didn't really seem to come into the game. Bolton Wanderers were the better team. Bolton Wanderers just made Plymouth really look amateur. They outplayed them. They outran them. They just, I don't know if Plymouth were just tired after all the training. They just seemed to not really come into the game much at all. They just seemed to be a little bit lethargic, and we just didn't really seem to want to be there. Whereas Bolton, Ian Everts Bolton, really seemed to be up to the task of winning, and they did. It just really showed that Bolton must have gone into the game a lot more better prepared than what Plymouth were. And finally, for today's episode, we're going to finally talk about Mick McCarthy sacking at Blackpool. Blackpool released this statement 3 days ago. Blackpool Football Club can confirm Mick McCarthy and Terry Connor have both left the club by mutual consent. With results on the pitch not improving in recent weeks, the decision has been agreed by both parties that a change is needed. Mick McCarthy himself came out and he said, after recent performances and results, he's thought long and hard about him staying at the club and feels that the best decision for everyone involved and concerned with the football club. He loved his time there and thanked everyone for their support, and he wished everyone well going forward. The club thanked both Mick and Terry for their efforts and wished them well for the future. Stephen Dobbie has now taken charge of Blackpool Football Club with the Seasiders. Unfortunately, performances has not changed really since Stephen Dobbie came in charge. In the last 5 games, they've won 1 and lost 4, with their only win being a 6-1 win over QPR, with losses coming from Coventry, Preston North End, Cardiff City and Luton Town in the games that followed. I'd like to thank you all very much for listening to this week's episode of the EFL Digest, and I will catch you all next week. Thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe, give us a like and share to your friends. So, see you all next week. Bye!